Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Channel. Tonight, we're stepping into one of Earth's most dramatic transformations, the rainy season. What can seem like a simple stretch of weather is really a planetary turning point. Clouds gather over forests, plains, mountains, and coasts. Dry grounds drink deeply, and rivers begin to swell. Seeds awaken, frogs begin to call, and insects rise in sudden swarms. Entire landscapes change their rhythm because the rain has returned. These seasons do far more than soak the earth. They decide when life can begin again. They feed forests, refill hidden water below the ground. They shape harvests and even guide migrations. In some places, the coming rains are awaited with hope. In others, they arrive with thunder, flood, and astonishing force. And behind it all are vast systems of air, heat, land, and sea, moving together on a scale so large it can be seen from space. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, simply settle in. Let your breathing slow and allow your shoulders to soften. And as the day begins to gently fade away, join me as we explore this fascinating season together. Let's begin. Some rainy seasons move more water than the world's greatest rivers. When the wet months arrive in the right part of the world, the sky can become a second ocean. In South Asia, seasonal rains deliver such an immense volume of water that whole river systems seem to answer back at once. Hillsides release runoff. Floodplains fill. Channels that looked manageable in the dry season suddenly spread wide and brown across the land. What feels astonishing is the scale. A great river carries water through a landscape, but a rainy season can pour water onto nearly every part of that landscape at the same time. That is why roads vanish, lakes expand, and fields become mirrors of the sky. It is also why so many of the richest farming regions on Earth depend on this annual deluge. The rain is not just weather. It is a moving transfer of water so vast that it rivals the planet's grandest flowing systems and, for a time, can seem to overwhelm them. Entire landscapes can wake up within days of the first rains. A dry landscape can look finished. Dust lies still. Seeds sleep underground. Insects hide. The air feels empty of motion. Then the first real soaking rain arrives, and the transformation can be almost unbelievable. In northern Australia and parts of Africa, bare ground can flush green with new shoots in only a few days. Dormant seeds that have waited through months of heat suddenly begin to germinate together. Frogs emerge from mud chambers. Termites break open the softened earth. Shallow hollows become ponds, and those ponds begin attracting life almost immediately. Birds appear where there was silence before. The change is so fast because many organisms are not beginning from nothing. They have been waiting, prepared, timed to this exact signal. The rain acts like a switch. It tells roots to grow, eggs to hatch, and hidden bodies to rise. What looked lifeless was full of delayed motion, ready to answer water the moment it returned. A rainy season can begin because oceans thousands of miles away are warned. One of the strangest things about seasonal rain is that its trigger may lie far beyond the place where it falls. A farming valley can wait for clouds, while the deeper cause is unfolding over distant tropical seas. When large areas of ocean warm, they release more heat and moisture into the atmosphere. That changes pressure patterns, shifts winds, and nudges enormous belts of rising air into new positions. The result can be delayed rain in one country and sudden abundance in another. This is why climate patterns such as El Niño matter so much. They connect faraway waters to local fates. A village watching the sky may actually be living at the far end of a planetary conversation between sea surface temperatures, winds, and moving air masses. It is a remarkable thought. The first storm over a field may owe part of its existence to warm water far beyond the horizon, where no one there will ever feel that rain. The air before seasonal rain can hold astonishing amounts of hidden water. Before the first heavy downpour, the atmosphere can already be carrying an invisible burden. Warm air is able to hold far more water vapor than cool air, which means a humid buildup before the wet season is really the sky loading itself. You feel it on the skin first. Clothes cling. Breathing seems heavier. Distant thunderheads begin rising higher each afternoon. What makes this so fascinating is that the water is present long before it becomes visible. It is suspended as vapor, mixed into the air in quantities that can be enormous across a whole region. Then, when rising air cools high above the surface, that hidden moisture condenses into cloud droplets and ice, and the sky suddenly reveals what it was storing. A storm is not simply water appearing from nowhere. It is the moment an atmosphere full of invisible moisture crosses a threshold and can no longer keep its cargo aloft. In some places, rainy seasons decide when whole civilizations can thrive. For much of human history, the arrival of seasonal rain was not a background detail of life. It was the great turning point of the year. In South Asia, East Africa, and many other regions, the timing of the wet months helped decide planting, harvest, travel, food storage, and political stability. A generous season could fill granaries, support cities, and strengthen rulers. A weak one could lead to hunger, migration, debt, and unrest. The reason is simple and immense. Reliable rain turns climate into agriculture, and agriculture into organized society. When the clouds arrived on time, people could plan. Irrigation channels, reservoirs, and calendars all gained their meaning from this repeated pattern. It is astonishing to think that empires, markets, and royal authority could depend on winds shifting over the sea and clouds forming inland. The seasonal rains did not just nourish crops. They shaped tax systems, labor cycles, and the confidence that tomorrow's food would exist. Forests, grasslands, and deserts can all transform when the rains return. The wet season does not produce one single kind of miracle. It creates very different worlds depending on where it arrives. In forests, extra rain can deepen growth, refill streams, and thicken the canopy with fresh leaves and fruit. In grasslands, broad plains can surge upward in green, drawing grazing animals across huge distances. In deserts, the change can feel most dramatic of all. Places that looked almost empty can burst into brief bloom, with flowers, insects, and annual plants rushing through an entire life cycle before the ground dries again. The same basic ingredient, water from the sky, unlocks very different responses because each landscape has evolved its own way of waiting. That is what makes the return of rain so captivating. It does not merely wet the land. It reveals the hidden character of that land. Each environment answers in its own language, and the contrast between them is part of the wonder. Seasonal rain can cool the land, feed rivers, and rewrite the sky. The arrival of the wet months changes more than what falls from the clouds. It changes the whole feel of a place. After long heat, the first sustained rain often lowers surface temperatures and softens the hard glare of the dry season. Dust is knocked from the air. The light changes. Colors deepen. Brown hills can take on green edges almost before people trust what they are seeing. At the same time, runoff begins gathering into gullies, streams, and rivers, sending water downslope into floodplains, wetlands, and reservoirs. Overhead, the sky itself takes on a new identity. Instead of wide, empty brightness, it becomes layered, dramatic, and alive with motion. Towering clouds build through the day. Distant curtains of rain blur the horizon. Evening storms can flicker for hours. It feels as though the atmosphere has developed structure and personality. In that sense, the rainy season is an artist. It reshapes temperature, water, and light all at once. Animals across entire continents time their lives to the rainy season. For countless animals, the return of rain is the signal that life can safely speed up. Across African savannas, herds move toward fresh grazing, opened by new plant growth. In tropical regions, insects emerge in huge numbers when water and leaves suddenly become abundant. Birds often respond by nesting at just the right moment, so chicks hatch into a world full of food. Amphibians are among the most dramatic examples. Species that remained hidden through the dry months begin pooling almost together once puddles, ponds, and marshes reappear. This coordination is extraordinary because it happens across immense areas. Whole populations are responding to cues in humidity, soil moisture, day length, and sound. The wet season becomes a biological clock spread across a landscape. It tells animals when to migrate, breed, feed, or gamble on raising young. Rain is not just a resource. It is timing itself, delivered from the sky and heard by life everywhere at once. Some rainy seasons are so powerful they can be seen from space. From orbit, the wet season does not appear as a local event. It appears as a moving planetary pattern. Satellites can watch great cloud bands gather over oceans, sweep onto continents, and pulse inland in organized waves. They can measure soil moisture darkening across vast regions, rivers expanding, and vegetation greening after the rains arrive. In that view, the scale becomes almost unbelievable. What people experience on the ground as thunder, puddles, swollen streams, and relief from heat is part of a system so large that it reshapes the face of continents. Scientists can even track the seasonal march of rain belts and compare them from year to year, revealing how small shifts in winds or ocean temperatures can alter life for millions. There is something awe-inspiring about that perspective. The rainy season is not just a chapter in local weather. It is one of Earth's great visible rhythms, a vast circulation of water and energy written across the planet itself. Monsoons are giant wind reversals, not just long spells of rain. What makes a monsoon so extraordinary is that it is not simply a rainy period. It is a seasonal reorganization of the atmosphere across land and sea. During one part of the year, winds blow mainly one way. Months later, they reverse and begin flowing from the opposite direction. That reversal changes everything. Moist marine air is driven inland, clouds build over heated land, and rain begins falling on a scale that can transform entire regions. In winter, the pattern can flip again, sending drier air outward. This is why the monsoon is better understood as a breathing cycle of the climate system than as a single weather event. It is a continental pulse, powered by differences in heating between ocean and land. When it arrives, it can decide planting, travel, river levels, and daily life for millions. The rain is what people feel, but the deeper wonder is the turning of the winds themselves. A rainy season begins when land heats faster than the sea. Sunlight falls on both ocean and continent, yet they do not respond in the same way. Water warms slowly because it mixes and stores heat through depth. Land warms much faster, especially under long, bright days. That difference creates one of the great engines of the wet season. As the ground heats, the air above it rises. Pressure drops over the land, and air from over the cooler sea begins flowing inland to replace it. That incoming air carries moisture gathered over open water. Once it rises over the hot land, it cools, condenses, and begins feeding clouds and storms. It is a beautifully simple process with enormous consequences. A difference in how quickly surfaces warm can set whole atmospheric systems in motion. The result is that fields, forests and cities may owe their season of rain to a thermal contrast that started quietly between coast and continent long before the first thunderhead appeared. Warm oceans can strengthen rainy seasons by feeding more water vapor. A warmer sea surface acts like a more generous source of moisture for the atmosphere. As temperatures rise, evaporation increases, and the air above the water becomes richer in vapor. That matters enormously when seasonal winds carry that air toward land. More moisture means more raw material for cloud formation, heavier bursts of rain, and a greater chance of powerful storms embedded within the wet season. Over tropical oceans, even a modest change in temperature can alter how much energy and water the atmosphere receives. It is almost as though the ocean is loading the air before sending it onward. When that moisture reaches rising air over land or mountains, the sky can release it with astonishing force. This is one reason forecasters watch sea surface temperatures so closely. The ocean is not a passive backdrop. It is one of the main suppliers for the coming rains, and when it runs warm, the atmosphere often arrives carrying more than usual. Mountains can squeeze rainy season clouds into heavier downpours. When moist air meets a mountain range, it cannot pass straight through. It is forced upward along the slopes, and that climb changes everything. Rising air cools. Cooling air loses its ability to hold as much moisture. Clouds thicken, droplets grow, and rain begins to fall more heavily than it might have over flat land. This is why windward mountain regions can become astonishingly wet during the seasonal rains. In some places, the effect is so strong that one side of a range becomes lush and river-cut, while the other lies in dramatic dryness. The mountain has acted like a great atmospheric press, lifting, cooling, and wringing moisture from the air. For people living nearby, this can mean sudden waterfalls, swollen streams, and steep hillsides under pressure from waterlogged soil. It is a remarkable partnership between rock and sky. A mountain does not make rain from nothing, but it can turn passing moisture into a much more intense release. Coastlines often get rain first because moist winds arrive there earliest. The first dramatic signs of the wet season often appear at the edge of the land. Coastal regions stand directly in the path of incoming marine air, so they are the first to receive the atmosphere's moisture when seasonal winds begin to shift. Fishermen may notice darker clouds gathering offshore. Heat haze gives way to humid gusts. Then showers start arriving over beaches, estuaries, and coastal towns before the rains have penetrated far inland. This early arrival can feel like a message from the sea that the larger transition has begun. The ocean has been storing heat, feeding evaporation, and preparing the air for weeks. Once the circulation changes, the coast becomes the front door for the season. It is where marine moisture first meets land. That is why harbors, mangroves, and coastal farms may feel the turning point before interior plains do. The wet season often steps ashore at the coastline before marching farther inland. Inland rainy seasons can lag far behind nearby coasts. A map can make places look close together that behave very differently under the sky. A coastal city may already be soaked by early wet season storms, while an inland plateau or valley remains dry, dusty, and waiting. That delay happens because moisture has to travel, and inland landscapes often require a stronger or more sustained atmospheric push before the rains can fully establish themselves. Air may lose some moisture along the way, or it may need extra heating over land before deep convection really takes hold. Hills, plateaus, and regional wind patterns can all slow the advance. For people living inland, this can make the season feel uncertain and tense. News of rain elsewhere only sharpens the absence of home. Then, sometimes quite suddenly, the pattern shifts and the waiting ends. What is fascinating is that the same rainy season can unfold in stages across short geographic distances, with neighboring regions living in very different climates for weeks. Some regions have 2 rainy seasons instead of 1. Near the equator, the year can be divided not into 1 wet season and 1 dry season, but into 2 distinct periods of rain separated by drier intervals. This happens because the great belt of rising tropical air migrates north and south through the year, crossing some places twice. Each crossing can bring a pulse of cloud growth, storms, and renewed plant activity. In East Africa, for example, many people speak of long rains and short rains, each with its own character, timing, and agricultural importance. The rhythm is especially intriguing because the year feels split into repeating awakenings rather than one single dramatic transformation. Fields may be planted twice. Insects and birds may respond differently to each period. Rivers and soils carry the memory of both. It is a reminder that the planet's seasonal patterns are not always simple. In some places, the atmosphere returns with rain, retreats, and then comes back again as if the year were breathing in 2 beats. The shifting position of the sun helps steer seasonal rain belts. The wet season is guided in part by a celestial rhythm so familiar that we rarely stop to marvel at it. As Earth orbits the sun and tilts on its axis, the zone of strongest heating shifts north and south through the year. That movement changes where warm air rises most strongly, and with it, the position of broad tropical rain belts. Regions under that migrating zone are more likely to see clouds build, air rise, and moisture condense into seasonal rain. In this way, the path of the sun across the sky helps shape when whole landscapes become green, muddy, flooded, or fertile. It is astonishing to think that the timing of puddles in a village lane or sowing in a distant field can be linked to planetary geometry. The rainy season feels local when it arrives, but part of its story begins with the turning Earth and the changing angle of sunlight across the globe. The intertropical convergence zone helps organize many tropical rainy seasons. Across the tropics, there is a broad region where winds from the northern and southern hemispheres meet. This meeting zone, known as the intertropical convergence zone, is one of the great architects of tropical rainfall. Where those winds converge, air is forced upward. Rising air cools, clouds blossom, and frequent rain follows. The zone is not fixed. It drifts north and south through the year, and that movement helps determine when many tropical places receive their wet months. For farmers and ecosystems, its seasonal journey can be decisive. If it lingers, rains may continue. If it arrives late or weakens, anxiety spreads. What makes it so fascinating is that an invisible band of atmospheric convergence can shape forests, savannas, river flows, and food supplies across vast regions. It is not a wall in the sky. It is a moving region of uplift, moisture, and cloud making that quietly organizes some of the most important rains on Earth. The first storm of the season can change scents, sounds, and chemistry. A place does not merely look different when the first real storm breaks. It smells and sounds different too. The famous scent after rain comes partly from plant oils and compounds released by soil microbes, which are lifted into the air when raindrops strike the ground. After a long dry spell, that smell can feel almost electric, as if the land itself has exhaled. Sound changes as well. Dry leaves stop crackling. Roofs begin drumming. Dusty silence gives way to runoff, dripping branches, and distant thunder rolling through heavier air. Even the chemistry of the surface begins to shift. Water dissolves minerals, wakes microbes, and starts moving nutrients into soils, roots, puddles, and streams. What is so captivating is how fast this happens. A single storm can turn stillness into activity across many layers of the environment at once. It is a sensory threshold. The world before and after that first downpour does not feel like quite the same place. Seasonal thunderclouds can tower higher than cruising passenger jets. The storm clouds of the wet season are not modest features drifting overhead. Some are colossal vertical engines that rise from hot ground into the upper atmosphere with astonishing force. These towering cumulonimbus clouds can grow so high that their tops spread outward into icy anvils above the altitude where passenger aircraft usually cruise. Inside them, warm, moist air surges upward, while rain, hail, and cooled air descend. Lightning forms. Thunder rolls for miles. In strong cases, the cloud becomes a whole weather world in itself, with violent updrafts, sheets of rain, and shifting internal currents hidden behind a bright white exterior. Seen from a distance, such clouds can look majestic and almost sculptural. Up close, they contain intense turbulence and energy. Their existence reveals how much power can be released when heat, moisture, and unstable air combine. A seasonal storm cloud is not just a rain source. It is one of the atmosphere's grandest temporary structures. Rainy seasons can fail when large climate patterns disrupt normal winds. People often imagine the wet season as dependable, even if variable. Yet it can falter dramatically when the larger climate machinery of the planet shifts out of its usual arrangement. Atmospheric pressure patterns may alter the pathways of moisture-bearing winds. Ocean temperatures may weaken the flow of humid air toward land. Jet streams and circulation cells may nudge storm tracks away from the regions that rely on them. When that happens, the sky can remain stubbornly empty during weeks that should have brought relief. Crops stall. Reservoirs stay low. Pastures fade. The tragedy is that nothing on the ground may appear visibly broken at first. The fields are ready. The seeds are waiting. The calendar says the season should have begun. But the air above is following a disrupted script. That is what makes a failed wet season so unsettling. It shows how local life can be held hostage by vast climate patterns unfolding far beyond the horizon. El Niño can weaken rain in some places and intensify it elsewhere. El Niño begins in the tropical Pacific, but its reach extends astonishingly far. When waters in the central and eastern Pacific grow unusually warm, they change where heat rises into the atmosphere. That shift alters circulation patterns across the globe, rearranging where moisture travels and where storm systems are favored. The result is not a single effect, but a global reshuffling. Some regions that usually expect generous seasonal rain may experience disappointing or delayed wet months. Elsewhere, conditions can turn wetter, stormier, or more flood-prone than normal. This is why El Niño is watched so closely by farmers, disaster planners, and climate scientists. It is a reminder that the atmosphere is connected across oceans and continents in ways that are easy to forget. A change in Pacific waters can influence rivers, crops, and cloud patterns on distant shores. One oceanic shift can rewrite rainy season expectations across multiple parts of the world. La Niña can make certain rainy seasons longer, wetter, and stormier. If El Niño is one face of Pacific climate variability, La Niña is another, and it can be just as powerful in shaping the wet season. During La Niña, tropical Pacific waters in key regions become cooler than usual. That cooling alters the atmosphere's circulation in ways that can strengthen moisture transport towards some continents and reinforce the conditions that favor rain. In the right places, the effect can be dramatic. Wet seasons may begin robustly, persist longer than expected, or produce more frequent heavy bursts. Rivers can stay high. Fields may flourish, though flooding risk often rises with them. What makes La Niña so compelling is that it can tilt the odds toward a more forceful rainy season without controlling every single storm. It loads the dice rather than dictating each outcome. For communities that live by seasonal water, that subtle but powerful shift can shape agriculture, transport, health, and daily life for months. The Indian monsoon influences weather far beyond South Asia. The monsoon over the Indian subcontinent is so vast and energetic that its effects ripple well beyond the region most people associate with it. As heated land draws in moisture-laden air and immense cloud systems develop, the atmosphere responds on a broader scale. The release of heat through condensation in monsoon storms can influence upper-level circulation, shifting patterns that connect with weather farther afield. Scientists study these links because the monsoon is not an isolated regional drama. It is part of the global climate engine. Its strength can affect conditions across the Indian Ocean, East Asia, and beyond through teleconnections in the atmosphere. For millions in South Asia, it is already one of the most important seasonal events on Earth. Yet its wider influence makes it even more astonishing. A season centered on one region can help reshape weather patterns thousands of miles away, proving that the atmosphere behaves less like separate local systems and more like one connected whole. West Africa's rainy season helps drive life across the Sahel. The Sahel is a vast transition zone between the Sahara Desert to the north and greener regions to the south. Here, the arrival of the rains is not merely welcome, it is transformative. As moist air pushes northward in the wet months, grasses emerge, shrubs revive, and temporary pools appear across landscapes that looked harsh and exhausted only weeks earlier. Herds move in search of fresh grazing. Farmers sow millet and sorghum into newly softened ground. Birds, insects, and countless smaller forms of life respond to the sudden window of possibility. The striking thing about the Sahel is how narrow the margin can be between abundance and hardship. A slight shift in the strength or reach of the wet season can alter harvests and pasture across enormous areas. That gives the rains an almost dramatic significance. They are not decorating the land. They are redrawing the boundary between scarcity and growth across one of Earth's most climate-sensitive regions. The Amazon helps create part of its own seasonal rainfall. One of the most astonishing features of the Amazon is that the forest is not just receiving rain. It is helping generate it. Trees pull huge quantities of water from the ground and release it back into the atmosphere through transpiration. Taken together across such a vast area, that process loads the air with moisture, which then helps feed cloud formation and further rainfall. In effect, the forest participates in a giant recycling loop. Water falls, is absorbed, lifted through trunks and leaves, and then returned skyward to fall again. This means the rainforest is not simply a passive beneficiary of climate. It is part of the mechanism sustaining the wet environment it depends on. That relationship is one reason scientists worry about large-scale forest loss. Reduce the trees, and you may weaken part of the rainfall system itself. The Amazon is remarkable not only for its size and biodiversity, but for helping build its own rainy world. Northern Australia's wet season transforms dry ground into temporary inland seas. In Northern Australia, the contrast between dry months and wet months can feel almost unbelievable. During the dry season, vast areas appear parched, hard, and sparsely watered. Then the monsoonal rains arrive, and low-lying country fills until whole landscapes resemble shallow inland seas. Floodplains spread outward, wetlands reconnect, and channels that had seemed minor become sprawling water networks. Fish move into newly flooded country. Waterbirds gather in great numbers. Crocodiles find expanded habitat, and the entire region seems to breathe outward with water. This is not a small adjustment. It is a seasonal remaking of geography. Places that were crossed on foot or by vehicle can become inaccessible except by boat or air. The transformation also reveals how much life has adapted to this pulse. Plants, birds, reptiles, and fish all use the temporary abundance in different ways. The wet season here does not simply moisten the land. It redraws its boundaries for a time. East Africa's long rains and short rains follow different rhythms. In parts of East Africa, the year carries 2 rainy periods, but they are not simply identical wet chapters separated by drier weather. The long rains and short rains often arise from somewhat different atmospheric influences. and their reliability can differ in important ways. One may be more vulnerable to failure. The other may show sharper links to large climate patterns over distant oceans. For communities relying on agriculture, this matters enormously. Each rainy period has its own role in planting, pasture recovery, and water supply. What makes the system so fascinating is its layered complexity. The atmosphere visits twice, but not with the same mood each time. One season may arrive broad and sustained. The other may come in shorter, more uncertain pulses. To outsiders, this might sound like a simple doubling of opportunity. In reality, it creates a delicate calendar that people have learned to read with great care, because each rainfall window tells a different story. Southern Asia can wait months for one dramatic seasonal wind shift. There are few moments in climate as anticipated as the onset of the great seasonal rains in Southern Asia. Before they arrive, heat can build for weeks under bright skies and rising humidity. Fields are prepared. Reservoir levels are watched. People follow forecasts with intense attention. Then comes the turning point. Winds that had favored one pattern give way to another, and moist oceanic air begins pushing inland with conviction. The change can feel almost theatrical. Dark cloud bands gather. Temperatures ease. The smell of dust gives way to wet ground. In many areas, daily life has long been organized around this expected shift because so much depends on it. That is what makes the onset so compelling. It is not merely a meteorological transition. It is a moment when a whole region seems to exhale. After months of waiting, one broad atmospheric reversal can announce that the season of water, planting, movement, and relief has finally begun. In the tropics, rain often arrives with remarkable daily regularity. In many tropical regions during the wet season, the atmosphere settles into a rhythm so consistent that people can almost set their expectations by the clock. Morning begins warm and bright. By midday, rising heat feeds the growth of clouds. Through afternoon, those clouds tower higher, darken, and begin producing showers or thunderstorms. By evening, the air may cool again, and the pattern resets for the next day. This regularity emerges because solar heating is so strong and dependable in the tropics. Each day, the land is reheated. Each day, moist air is lifted. Each day, the sky has another chance to build storms. Of course, no schedule is perfect, and larger weather systems can interrupt it. Still, the persistence of the pattern is remarkable. The rainy season can feel less like random chaos and more like a daily atmospheric ritual, with sunlight preparing the stage and afternoon rain arriving as a familiar, powerful finale. Seasonal rains can recharge aquifers hidden deep beneath the ground. Not all rain stays where we can see it. Some of the most important water vanishes underground. When the wet season arrives, part of that falling water seeps through soil, slips into cracks in rock, and slowly descends into aquifers buried far below the surface. These hidden reserves can feed wells, springs, and rivers long after the clouds have gone. What makes this so fascinating is the timescale. A thunderstorm may last an hour, yet the water it delivers underground may support life for months, years, or even far longer. In some places, the land acts like a giant sponge and vault at once, taking in seasonal abundance and storing it out of sight. Farmers may draw on that invisible gift in the dry season without ever seeing the moment it was banked. The rainy season is not only filling rivers and ponds, it is quietly loading deep reserves beneath our feet, where the landscape keeps its emergency savings. Floodplains depend on rainy seasons to spread nutrients across the land. A floodplain is one of nature's most generous bargains. For much of the year, it may look like ordinary low ground beside a river. Then the rains come, the river rises, and water spills beyond its banks. That overflow can seem destructive at first, but it often carries astonishing wealth. Fine sediments, dissolved minerals, and decaying organic matter spread across the plain in a thin, fertile layer. When the water retreats, it leaves behind soil renewed for crops and wild growth alike. This is why so many ancient societies flourished beside rivers with predictable seasonal flooding. The floodplain was not just land near water. It was land that the river actively fed. Without those rains upstream and the swelling that followed, the system would lose much of its magic. The wet season turns the river into a distributing force, carrying nourishment out of the channel and laying it gently across the waiting ground. Rivers can rise astonishingly fast during the peak wet months. A river can seem patient for most of the year. It curves through its banks with a pace that feels familiar and contained. Then the height of the wet season arrives, and that calm impression can disappear in startling fashion. Heavy rain over a wide basin sends water rushing downhill through tributaries, gullies, and streams, all converging into the main channel. Because so much of this happens upstream or out of sight, a river can begin climbing before people nearby fully understand what is on the way. Muddy water surges higher against bridge supports. Sandbanks vanish. Currents strengthen. In steep terrain, the change can be especially dramatic, with water levels rising in hours rather than days. What makes this so gripping is the sheer speed of transformation. The same river that looked readable and known can become forceful, swollen, and dangerous almost overnight, revealing how quickly the wet season can translate cloudbursts into moving power. Seasonal rain can carve new channels through soft earth in weeks. Water does not need centuries to reshape land when conditions are right. During an intense wet season, repeated downpours can turn loose soil into something surprisingly vulnerable. Runoff begins as thin sheets slipping across the surface. Soon it gathers into small rivulets, then cuts deeper as more water follows the same path. Gullies appear where there were none before. Streambeds widen. A field edge, dirt road, or bare hillside can develop entirely new drainage lines in a matter of weeks. This is landscape change on fast forward. The land is being edited by gravity and moving water in real time. In places with sparse vegetation or recently disturbed ground, the effect can be especially dramatic. Once a new channel forms, future rains may keep using it, deepening the cut and turning a temporary scar into a lasting feature. The wet season is not only feeding life, it is drafting new maps into the earth itself. Wet seasons can trigger landslides where hillsides are already unstable. A hillside may look solid until the wet season reveals how much tension has been hiding inside it. As rain soaks into the ground, water fills pore spaces in soil and fractured rock. That added weight matters, but even more important is the loss of friction. Material that once gripped the slope more securely can begin to loosen. Roots help, and stable geology helps. But where slopes are steep, cut, deforested, or naturally weak, prolonged rain can push the balance toward collapse. Then, sometimes with little warning, part of the hillside gives way. Mud, rock, and uprooted trees rush down slope with terrifying speed. What makes this so sobering is that the trigger can be invisible until the moment of failure. The rain seems to be merely falling, yet underground it is changing pressure, weight, and stability. In those moments, the wet season shows that water can be both life-giving and a quiet architect of sudden disaster. Heavy seasonal rain can refill lakes that nearly vanished in drought. After a long dry spell, a shrinking lake can look like a retreating memory. Shorelines pull back. Boats sit stranded on mud. Reeds creep outward into what was once open water. Then the wet season returns with enough force, and the transformation can feel almost miraculous. Rivers feeding the basin begin flowing strongly again. Runoff pours in from surrounding land. Water levels rise, sometimes steadily, sometimes in dramatic leaps after major storms. Bays that had turned to cracked flats disappear beneath fresh water. Birds return. Fish find new space. Human communities that depend on the lake begin to breathe easier. The fascination lies in how quickly a basin can recover when the sky finally relents. A lake records climate in plain sight. Its shrinking tells one story. Its refilling tells another. The wet season can turn a landscape of retreat into one of return, restoring not only water, but confidence, movement, and life around the shore. Temporary wetlands appear during rainy seasons, then disappear again for months. Some wetlands are permanent, but others exist only because the wet season writes them into being. Rain fills shallow depressions, floodplain hollows, grassland pans, and low-lying basins until places that were dry ground suddenly become shimmering habitat. For a few weeks or months, these temporary waters can teem with life. Insects hatch in explosive numbers. Frogs breed fast. Waterbirds arrive to feed or nest. Seeds that require standing water finally get their chance. Then, as the season fades and evaporation gains the upper hand, the wetland contracts and vanishes, leaving behind mud, dormant eggs, buried seeds, and a memory in the soil. What is so captivating is the precision of this cycle. Many organisms have evolved specifically for these brief windows, living as though they trust the land to become water on schedule. The rainy season creates whole ecosystems that are temporary in shape, yet ancient and reliable in rhythm. Seasonal flooding can build some of the most fertile soils on Earth. Crate farming soils are often born not from stillness, but from movement. During seasonal floods, rivers spread beyond their channels and slow across wider ground. As the water loses speed, it drops fine particles it had been carrying from upstream. Silt, clay, organic fragments, and dissolved nutrients settle out layer by layer. Over many flood seasons, this builds rich alluvial soils that are easy to work and full of the ingredients plants need. Some of the most productive agricultural regions in history owe their power to this repeated gift from floodwater. The process is almost elegant in its patience. Rain falls far away, rivers gather it, floods spread it, and the land receives a fresh dressing of fertility. This means a wet season is not only about water itself, it is also about the cargo water carries. Each flood can be understood as a delivery, bringing microscopic wealth that accumulates into some of the planet's most rewarding ground. Rainy seasons can transport dust, minerals, and nutrients across continents. Rain may seem local when it falls, yet part of its story begins with material carried over astonishing distances. Winds can lift dust from dry regions and sweep it across seas and continents before the wet season helps bring it down. Some of that dust is rich in minerals such as phosphorus and iron, which matter deeply to soils and ecosystems. A famous example links Saharan dust to the Amazon, where airborne material from Africa contributes nutrients to rainforest systems across the Atlantic. This is one of the most surprising things about the wet season. It can act as part of a delivery network on a planetary scale. Material lifted from one continent may help fertilize life on another. The rain is not just water returning to Earth. Sometimes it is the final step in a long atmospheric journey involving deserts, winds, oceans, and distant forests. The sky becomes a courier, moving hidden ingredients across the world. The color of rivers can change dramatically during the rainy months. A river in the dry season may run clear, greenish, or dark with tannins, depending on the landscape it drains. Then the rains arrive, and the river can seem to change identity. Heavy runoff sweeps soil, clay, leaf litter, and organic matter into the current. Suddenly the water may turn brown, red, yellow, or almost milky with suspended sediment. In forest regions, floodwaters can darken with dissolved compounds from vegetation. In places with iron-rich soils, the water can take on a rusty tone. These color shifts are not just visual curiosities. They reveal what the river is carrying and where that material has come from. The wet season turns rivers into moving records of the land around them. Their color becomes evidence of erosion, geology, plant decay, and floodplain connection. To watch a river change shade with the rains is to see the landscape being gathered up, mixed into water, and sent downstream in motion. Many seeds wait in dry soil until rainy season signals germination. Beneath apparently lifeless ground, there can be a hidden archive of patience. Many plants produce seeds that do not germinate the moment they land. Instead, they remain dormant in dry soil, protected by tough coats and biochemical safeguards, waiting for the right signal. The wet season provides that signal. Moisture penetrates the seed, enzymes awaken, and growth begins. What is remarkable is how many species can respond in near unison once the conditions are finally right. A field that looked barren can become crowded with green points in a matter of days because the life was already there, sealed and waiting. Some seeds even require a certain depth of soaking or a combination of warmth and water before they commit. That caution is a survival strategy. Germinating too early could be fatal. The rainy season is therefore not just a source of water. It is the trusted message that tells buried futures the moment has finally come. Some flowers bloom almost all at once after the first rains. There are moments after the first proper rains when the landscape seems to decide all at once to become visible. Buds that have been held back through heat and dust suddenly open across wide areas in an almost synchronized display. In arid and seasonal regions, this can be spectacular. Dry plains erupt with color. Roadsides brighten. Insects converge on fresh nectar as though summoned. The impression is one of sudden abundance, but the timing is the real wonder. Plants are reading moisture, temperature, and day length with great precision. They have one chance to exploit a brief window when pollinators are active, and the soil still holds enough water to support reproductive effort. Booming together can also increase the odds of successful pollination by turning a sparse landscape into a mass invitation for insects and birds. The first rains do more than wake leaves. They can trigger one of the most dramatic coordinated performances in the plant world. Grasses can surge upward with astonishing speed during wet months. Grasslands often reveal the wet season in one of the clearest ways imaginable. After enough rain, the change can be measured not just in color, but in height. What had been cropped short, browned off, or nearly absent begins shooting upward with surprising speed. This rapid growth happens because grasses are built for it. Many have growing points close to the ground, which protects them through grazing and dry periods. When water returns, they can pour energy into new blades and stems almost immediately. Roots that persisted underground suddenly have the moisture needed to support fast expansion above the surface. The effect on the wider landscape is immense. Fresh grazing appears. Soil is shaded. Wind moves differently across the plain. The open ground becomes a living surface in motion. The wet season turns grass from background into architect. It builds food, cover, fuel, and texture across huge areas, often so quickly that the land seems to rise into green. Tropical forests often produce new leaves just before peak rains. It might seem natural to assume that tropical trees wait for the heaviest rains before investing in new growth, yet many forests show something more subtle and intriguing. In some regions, trees flush fresh leaves just before the wet season reaches its fullest strength. This timing may help them take advantage of increasing moisture and light conditions while avoiding some of the damage or shading that comes with the cloudiest, rainiest weeks. New leaves can appear in waves, changing the look of the canopy from one shade of green to another. In some forests, this produces a brief period when the treetops seem brighter, softer, and more active all at once. The forest is preparing itself for the season ahead. It is not merely reacting when water is already everywhere. It is anticipating. That is part of what makes seasonal forests so captivating. They do not just endure the wet months. They time their own growth with remarkable finesse. Desert plants can use a brief rainy season to complete entire life cycles. In deserts, time is often measured less by months than by opportunity. Some plants spend most of the year as seeds, waiting for a short burst of rain that may last only days or weeks. When that window opens, everything happens fast. Germination begins almost immediately. Roots push into newly softened ground. Leaves appear, followed by flowers, pollination, seed production, and then death. The entire visible life of the plant may unfold in a remarkably brief span. This is one of the most astonishing strategies in the natural world. Instead of fighting the desert's long hardship continuously, these plants escape it for most of the year in the form of seeds. They live intensely when conditions allow, then retreat again into dormancy. After rain, the desert can suddenly look full of delicate color and motion, but beneath that beauty lies ruthless timing. The wet season is not just helpful here. It is the narrow opening through which life sprints. Seasonal rain can awaken microbes that have slept through long droughts. Dry soil is not dead soil. Even after long drought, it can contain immense populations of bacteria and other microbes in a low-activity state, enduring heat and scarcity with astonishing resilience. Then the rains come, and the response can be immediate. Water rehydrates cells, dissolved nutrients begin moving again, and microbial metabolism surges. This awakening matters enormously because microbes help decompose organic matter, cycle nutrients, and influence how soils support plant growth. In a sense, the wet season does not only wake visible life, it activates the invisible workforce beneath every step. Some of the first pulses of biological activity after rain come from organisms too small to see, yet powerful enough to change the chemistry of the ground around them. The smell of wet earth itself is partly tied to this hidden world. A rainfall event is therefore not just a surface spectacle. It is also a microscopic revival, with billions of tiny sleepers returning to work at once. Mosses and lichens can revive within hours of steady rainfall. Some of the most remarkable wet season recoveries belong to organisms that seem almost suspended between life and stillness when dry. Mosses and many lichens can lose much of their water and enter a state of deep inactivity during harsh conditions. They may look brittle, faded, and finished. Yet after steady rain, they can rehydrate with astonishing speed. Color returns. Tissues soften. Photosynthesis resumes. In the space of hours, what seemed lifeless begins functioning again. This ability allows them to survive on rocks, bark, roofs, and exposed ground in places where constant moisture cannot be trusted. The wet season does not need to rebuild them from scratch. It simply returns the water that lets their machinery start up once more. There is something almost magical in that transition. A silent crust on stone becomes living green again because the atmosphere changed. Rain reveals how much vitality can be hidden inside forms that appear almost completely still. Rainy seasons help forests store carbon by fueling bursts of growth. When the wet season intensifies growth across a forest, it is also influencing one of the planet's great carbon stories. Trees and other plants pull carbon dioxide from the air during photosynthesis and use it to build wood, bark, roots, and leaves. Water is essential to that work. During favorable rainy periods, many forests can support strong pulses of growth that help lock more carbon into living tissue and soils. This does not mean every forest responds in exactly the same way, since cloud cover, temperature, and nutrient limits also matter. Yet the central truth is striking. A season of abundant water can strengthen the forest's role as a carbon store by allowing more biological construction to take place. New wood forms, roots expand, leaf area increases, The wet season becomes part of the machinery by which forests help shape the atmosphere itself. Rain is not only feeding plants, it is supporting one of Earth's largest long-term exchanges between air and life. Fungi can appear overnight when wet conditions finally settle in. After enough moisture settles into soil, bark, and leaf litter, the forest floor can seem to perform a conjuring trick. Mushrooms that were not visible the previous day suddenly appear in clusters, shelves, or delicate towers. The reason is that most of the fungus was already there. Hidden threads called mycelium had been living through the substrate all along, digesting material and spreading quietly out of sight. When temperature and moisture align, that network can rapidly produce fruiting bodies, sending them upward in a burst designed to release spores. This is why the wet season can make fungi seem magical. Their arrival feels sudden, but it is actually the visible moment in a much longer hidden life. Some glow briefly with freshness. Others collapse just as fast. In wet months, fallen logs, shaded banks, and forest litter become stages for these appearances. Rain does not create fungi from nowhere. It gives the hidden network permission to show itself. Some trees fruit during rainy seasons to match animal migrations. Timing matters as much in fruiting as it does in flowering. And many trees appear to release their crop when the wet season brings the right animal traffic past their branches. In seasonal landscapes, rains can shift where birds, primates, bats, elephants, and other fruit eaters travel. Water becomes available in more places. Pathways reopen. Feeding grounds change. Trees that fruit during these times may gain a major advantage because the animals they rely on for seed dispersal are suddenly moving through the landscape in predictable ways. A swallowed seed can be carried far from the parent tree and deposited with a packet of fertilizer. That makes the relationship far more dynamic than simple feeding. The rainy season can align movement in animals with reproduction in plants, turning whole ecosystems into coordinated networks of travel and exchange. When the fruit ripens at the right moment, the tree is not just offering food. It is recruiting wandering partners for the next generation. Frogs in many regions begin calling almost exactly with the rains. In many seasonal landscapes, one of the clearest signs that the wet months have truly begun is not visual at all. It is musical. Dry ground that seemed almost silent can suddenly fill with trills, clicks, croaks, and pulsing calls as frogs emerge and begin advertising for mates. The timing can be uncanny. Some species appear within hours of the first substantial downpour, as though they have been listening from underground for a signal only they can recognize. For them, rain means water for eggs, pools for tadpoles, and a narrow chance to breed before those waters vanish or predators arrive in force. Males gather at puddles, roadside ditches, marsh edges, and temporary ponds, each trying to outsing the others. What sounds like a beautiful nighttime chorus is actually a frantic seasonal contest. The wet season gives frogs a stage, and they answer it with one of the most immediate and dramatic soundtracks in the natural world. Termites and ants may swarm when wet air softens the ground. One of the most startling wet season spectacles can happen in the air above your head. After warm rain and rising humidity, winged termites and ants may pour from nests in sudden swarms, turning the sky into a moving cloud of fragile bodies. The timing is not random. Moist ground is easier to dig. Damp air reduces the risk of drying out. New colonies have a better chance when the landscape is briefly rich with water and plant growth. For the insects, this is a moment of dangerous opportunity. They leave the safety of the nest, take flight, mate, and then fall back to Earth to begin entirely new societies. Most will not survive. Birds, reptiles, fish, and mammals feed heavily on the swarm. Yet enough escape to start again underground. What makes it so fascinating is the scale and coordination. A rainstorm does not just water the soil. It can trigger one of the largest and most synchronized acts of social reproduction on land. Fish can enter flooded forests during rainy seasons to feed. A forest may seem like the last place to imagine fish feeding, yet in parts of the world, the wet season makes exactly that possible. When rivers rise high enough, they spill into surrounding woodland and turn trunks, roots, and leaf litter into underwater habitat. Fish then swim among the trees, exploring a world that was dry land only weeks before. In the Amazon and other floodplain systems, this seasonal invasion opens a remarkable buffet. Fruits drop into the water. Seeds drift among submerged branches. Insects fall from leaves. Organic matter softens and breaks apart in the warm flood. Some fish have become so well adapted to this rhythm that they act almost like orchard foragers, using the flooded forest as a giant temporary dining hall. It is one of the wet season's strangest reversals. Water enters the forest, and creatures we normally associate with open rivers suddenly feed in a drowned landscape of bark, branches, and floating fruit. Some birds nest so chicks hatch when insects explode in number. For many birds, breeding is not just about finding a mate or building a secure nest. It is about solving a problem of timing. Chicks need enormous amounts of protein, and the best moment to raise them is often when the wet season triggers a surge in insect life. Caterpillars, flying termites, beetles, mosquitoes, and countless other invertebrates can become suddenly abundant once moisture, fresh leaves, and warm conditions align. Birds that get the timing right may find themselves in a temporary feast, able to shuffle food to hungry nestlings from dawn until dusk. If they mistime it, the same landscape may offer far less. That is why so many species key their breeding to subtle signs in rainfall, humidity, or plant growth. What seems like a simple nest in a tree or reed bed is often the result of precise seasonal calculation. The wet season does not only bring food, it sets the clock for successful parenthood. Elephants, zebras, and antelope follow seasonal rain across vast distances. Across some of the world's great grasslands and savannas, animals do not wait for the landscape to improve around them. They move to meet the rain. Elephants, zebras, and many kinds of antelope track the shifting pattern of wet months across huge distances, following the fresh plant growth that appears after storms pass. This can create migrations of astonishing scale and purpose. The animals are not wandering blindly. They are responding to changing forage, water availability, and the memory of routes that have paid off in previous years. New grass is more nutritious and easier to digest. Temporary water holes open. Calves and foals have better odds where food is plentiful. In this way, the wet season becomes a moving line of opportunity, and the herds travel with it like living weather followers. There is something deeply impressive in that image. The rain sweeps across the land, and entire populations rise and go after it. Crocodiles often breed when rising waters create safer nursery habitat. For crocodiles, the wet season can turn the edge of a river or swamp into a much better place to raise young. As water levels rise, shallow margins, flooded vegetation, and backwater areas expand. These places can provide warmth, cover, and relative shelter compared with more exposed channels. Nests are often built where the coming season will keep conditions favorable for eggs and later for hatchlings. Timing matters because young crocodiles are vulnerable to predators, drying, and sudden changes in water level. A well-matched season can create a broader nursery world of still pools, red beds, and hidden banks, where tiny crocodiles can begin life with a bit more protection. The parent's role can be astonishing too, with guarding, listening for hatching calls, and sometimes carrying young to water. The wet season is not simply a backdrop here. It helps construct the nursery itself, expanding the safe edges where ancient reptiles give their offspring a fighting chance. Turtles may use softened rainy season ground for easier nesting. For a female turtle carrying eggs, the condition of the ground can decide everything. Hard, baked earth is difficult to excavate and may expose her to danger for longer while she struggles. After seasonal rain, the same ground can soften into something workable, allowing her to dig a nest chamber with far less effort. In river systems, floodplains, and tropical landscapes, this can make the wet months an important nesting window for certain species. Moist soil can also influence temperature and humidity around the eggs, which matters for development. The scene itself is often easy to miss. Under darkness or dim evening light, a turtle drags herself into place and begins one of the most deliberate acts in nature, scraping, scooping, laying, covering, and then leaving the future buried behind her. What makes it so compelling is how strongly the sky is involved. The season's rain does not just green the land. It opens the ground for hidden generations. Insects can multiply spectacularly when puddles and plants suddenly abound. A wet season can make the small world feel almost overwhelming. Fresh puddles appear in wheel ruts, hollows, leaves, and ditches. Stems and shoots push upward. Rotting plant matter softens. All at once, countless insects find the conditions they have been waiting for. Mosquitoes breed in temporary water. Butterflies and moths discover new leaves for caterpillars. Beetles, flies, and true bugs take advantage of fresh growth, decay, and moisture. Because insects develop quickly, their populations can erupt with astonishing speed. What was nearly empty can become buzzing, clicking, biting, pollinating abundance in a matter of days. This matters far beyond the insects themselves. Birds, frogs, reptiles, bats, and fish all respond to the feast. The wet season is therefore not just a rise in numbers. It is a sudden thickening of the food web. Tiny bodies multiply, and the whole living system above them begins moving faster because of it. Some mammals time birth, so milk is plentiful in wet months. For a mammal mother, producing milk is one of the most demanding tasks in life. It requires water, energy, and reliable food. That is why many species in seasonal environments aim to have their young arrive when the wet months are filling the land with fresh growth. New grasses, leaves, shoots, and fruit can improve body condition and make lactation more sustainable. For grazing animals especially, the link can be powerful. A calf or fawn born into the right season enters a world where the mother is better nourished, water is easier to find, and cover may be more abundant. This timing can also shape the baby's first months, when rapid growth matters most. A mismatch with the season can be costly. What makes this so fascinating is that birth, one of the most intimate moments in animal life, is often synchronized with a giant atmospheric cycle. The wet season reaches right into the nursery through the mother's milk. Seasonal rain can turn quiet night landscapes into immense choruses. There are nights in the wet season when a place seems to discover its own hidden voice. A field, marsh, forest edge, or roadside pond that sounded almost empty in the dry months can erupt into layered sound once darkness falls after rain. Frogs call from every direction. Insects trill, rasp, and whine in shifting waves. Water drips from leaves. Crickets and katydids stitch patterns into the background. Sometimes birds, toads, or mammals add their own notes. The result is not a single sound, but a dense acoustic world that feels almost architectural, as though the landscape has built a roof of noise above itself. This is more than atmosphere. It is communication, reproduction, territory, and survival, all happening at once. The wet season creates the conditions for this sudden abundance of life, and life answers loudly. Night no longer feels empty or still. It becomes crowded with signals, each creature trying to be heard through the rain-born abundance around it. Human calendars were often built around the arrival of seasonal rains. Long before modern forecasting, many societies organized the year according to the expected return of rain. The reason was simple and profound. Seasonal water decided sowing, herding, travel, labor, and survival. A calendar that ignored it would be a poor guide to life. So communities watched the sky, the winds, the stars, and the land, shaping annual cycles around the moments when rain was likely to come. In some places, months were named for planting, flooding, or the onset of storms. Ceremonies, marriages, market movements, and collective labor all took their place in relation to the wet season's return. This means a calendar was not merely a way of counting days. It was a practical map of when life could expand, contract, gamble, or rest. The rainy season was so central that time itself was often measured around it. To know the year was, in part, to know when the clouds should begin their work. Ancient farmers watched winds, clouds, and insects for rainy season clues. Before instruments, satellites, and long-range models, people still had to decide when to plant. In seasonal climates, that decision could not wait for certainty. So ancient farmers became expert readers of small signs. A shift in wind direction might suggest moisture was moving inland. Cloud shapes on the horizon could hint that the atmosphere was changing character. The sudden appearance of certain insects, frogs, or birds might signal that the land itself sensed the coming season. These observations were not superstition in the simple sense people sometimes imagine. They were generations of pattern recognition built from urgent experience. Plant too early and seeds may die in dry soil. Plant too late, and the best of the season may be lost. The result was a deep practical attentiveness to the world. The wet season had to be anticipated before it was confirmed, so people learned to read clues in air, animals, and sky with remarkable care. Rice cultivation depends on reliable seasonal flooding in many regions. Few crops are tied to wet season water as intimately as rice. In many parts of Asia and beyond, its cultivation developed alongside landscapes that could be flooded, ponded, or carefully supplied with seasonal water. This created one of the great agricultural partnerships in human history. Flooded fields suppress many weeds, support young rice plants, and allow farmers to work with a crop unusually suited to standing water. Yet this system depends on timing and reliability. Too little wet season flow, and fields cannot be filled properly. Too much, and destructive flooding may overwhelm them. The balance is delicate, but when it works, it transforms rain into one of the world's foundational foods. What makes it so compelling is that an entire civilization-scale staple grew out of a relationship with seasonal water management. Rice is not just planted into soil. In many places, it is planted into a carefully shaped version of the rainy season itself. Seasonal rain once determined tax systems, harvests, and royal power. In agrarian kingdoms, the wet season did more than nourish crops. It helped decide the strength of the state. Harvest size influenced how much grain could be collected, stored, traded, or taxed, and harvest size depended heavily on rain. A ruler whose lands received timely seasonal water might preside over abundance, stable granaries, and stronger authority. A failed season could mean shortages, unrest, debt, and weakened control. This made rain politically important in a very direct way. Tax demands often rose and fell with expected yields. Administrative systems, irrigation works, and royal legitimacy could all be tied to whether the land had been watered well enough to produce. In some societies, rulers even linked themselves symbolically to rainfall and fertility, because success in governing was so visibly connected to agricultural outcomes. The sky, in other words, could influence the treasury. Wet months did not simply feed people. They helped decide who could rule with confidence. Cities have risen, where rainy seasons could be captured and stored. Some cities owe their existence not just to rivers, trade routes, or defensible ground, but to the ability to hold on to seasonal rain after it had fallen. In places where wet months were intense but limited, success depended on catching water when it was abundant and keeping it for the long, dry stretch ahead. Reservoirs, tanks, canals, embankments, and urban drainage systems made that possible. Once water could be stored, a settlement could grow beyond the immediate moment of rainfall. Gardens could persist. Households could survive dry months. Crafts, markets, and administration could become more secure. This gave certain locations a powerful advantage. They were not simply lucky enough to receive seasonal rain. They were able to turn that fleeting gift into continuity. What is fascinating is that urban endurance could hinge on engineering, timed to the sky. A city rose because it learned how to remember the wet season long after the clouds were gone. Stepwells, cisterns, and tanks were designed to save wet season water. Where rain came in bursts and then vanished for months, people built remarkable structures to keep part of that abundance close at hand. Stepwells descended deep into the ground so communities could follow water levels downward through the dry season. Cisterns stored runoff from roofs, courtyards, or paved surfaces. Tanks and reservoirs spread across the landscape, collecting monsoon water for people, animals, irrigation, and ritual use. These were not minor conveniences. They were survival architecture. Their design often reflected local climate with astonishing precision, shaped by geology, evaporation, and the expected rhythm of the rains. Some were purely practical. Others became beautiful civic spaces, carved, stepped, shaded, and woven into daily life. What makes them so compelling is that they embody a conversation between humans and seasonality. The wet months arrive briefly, and these structures answer by holding memory in stone and water. They are machines for extending a rainy season into the future. Traditional houses in monsoon climates often use steep roofs and deep eaves. A house built for a wet seasonal climate has to negotiate water constantly. In many monsoon regions, traditional architecture evolved around that challenge with striking elegance. Steep roofs help rain run off quickly before it can pool, seep, or become dangerously heavy. Deep eaves throw water farther from walls and foundations, giving doorways, windows, and workspaces more protection. Raised floors may help keep interiors dry when ground conditions worsen. Ventilation matters too, since humid air can trap heat and encourage decay if a building cannot breathe. All of this means that a roofline is never just a stylistic choice. It is climate knowledge made visible. The shape of a house records long experience with the wet season's force. In heavy rain, you can almost see the design thinking in action as water pours cleanly away from the living space. The building is not resisting the season by brute strength. It is cooperating with it wisely. Seasonal rains shaped clothing, travel, and trade across entire empires. When the wet season arrived, it could alter more than fields and rivers. It could change how people dressed, moved, and conducted business across huge territories. Roads became muddy or impassable. River transport might become easier in some places and dangerous in others. Caravans adjusted routes. Port activity shifted with wind and storm patterns. Merchants learned when goods could move efficiently and when they should wait. Clothing also reflected this rhythm, with garments, materials, and footwear shaped by the need to cope with heat, dampness, mud, and repeated soaking. In imperial systems, these seasonal realities affected taxation, military movement, market timing, and communication. A court might issue orders, but the rains decided how quickly they could travel. What makes this fascinating is the scale of influence. The wet season was not a local inconvenience. It was a force that could reorganize the tempo of transport and exchange across regions vast enough to be called empires. Some festivals celebrate the first rain as a turning point of life. In many cultures, the first true rain after a long dry period is treated not as routine weather, but as an emotional and communal threshold. It marks relief, hope, fertility, and the sense that the world is becoming generous again. Festivals tied to this moment often carry music, dancing, offerings, prayers, shared meals, or symbolic acts that welcome the returning season. The response makes deep sense. After heat, dust, worry, and waiting, the first rain means crops may be planted, animals may find better grazing, wells may recover, and daily hardship may ease. The celebration is therefore not merely about water falling from the sky. It is about the reopening of possibility. A landscape and a community can seem to cross together from endurance into expectation. What is especially beautiful is that this turning point is felt physically by everyone at once. The rain arrives, and hope becomes something people can smell, hear, and touch. Poets and musicians have long treated rainy seasons as seasons of longing. Across many traditions, the wet season is not only practical or ecological, it is emotional. Poets and musicians have often linked it with longing, reunion, memory, and desire. Part of that comes from atmosphere. Rain changes sound, scent, light, and distance. Horizons soften. Travel becomes harder. People may be kept apart, drawn together, or reminded of someone absent. In South Asian literature and music especially, the monsoon has often been imagined as a season that stirs feeling as powerfully as it waters fields. Thunder can suggest anticipation. Dark clouds can become symbols of separation or return. The first rain can feel like a letter from the world itself. This artistic response is fascinating because it shows that the wet season enters human life on more than material terms. It feeds crops and rivers, yes, but it also feeds metaphor. Rain becomes language for emotion, and the changing sky becomes part of the human heart's calendar. The smell after first rain comes partly from oils and soil bacteria. That famous scent after the first real rain feels almost magical, yet it has a wonderfully physical origin. During dry periods, certain plants release oils that settle onto rocks and soil. At the same time, soil-dwelling bacteria produce compounds such as geosmin, which can linger quietly in the ground until rain disturbs them. When the first drops strike, those oils and bacterial molecules are lifted into the air and carried toward us in a scent that feels ancient, earthy, and strangely emotional. It is not just pleasant. It is a message. The land is telling you that dry stillness has been broken. For animals and people alike, that smell can signal relief, movement, and the return of water. What makes it so captivating is that a whole season can announce itself first through the nose. Before rivers rise or plants green, the air itself can whisper that the world is changing. Raindrops can release tiny particles into the air when they strike soil. A falling raindrop does more than darken the ground. On impact, it can launch tiny particles back into the air. When a drop hits porous soil or a rough surface, little pockets of air become trapped and then burst upward as microscopic bubbles. Those bursting bubbles can fling fine particles, bacteria, and organic compounds into the atmosphere in a mist so small that it is invisible to the eye. This means rainfall is not only a downward journey. It can also create an upward spray of life and chemistry. Scientists have shown that this splash process may help move microbes from soil into the air, where winds can then carry them elsewhere. It is astonishing to think that the first storm is not simply washing the world. It is also stirring it, turning each impact into a tiny launch event. A raindrop striking earth becomes a moment of exchange between ground and sky. Wet earth can carry scents farther because humidity changes how we smell. The wet season can make familiar smells seem stronger, richer, and more present, even when their source has not changed very much. Part of the reason lies in humidity. Moist air influences how odor molecules travel and how easily our noses detect them. When the atmosphere is damp, the scent of soil, leaves, flowers, rot, and rain-soaked wood can seem to linger and spread more fully through a landscape. That is why a wet evening may feel thick with smells that would seem faint on a dry day. Our own bodies are part of the story as well, because moisture affects the delicate tissues inside the nose that help us register scent. The result is a world that feels more aromatic, more immediate, almost closer. The rainy season does not just change what the land looks like. It can deepen the way it arrives in the mind, through smells that travel farther and settle more strongly into memory. Rainy seasons often bring deeper greens, because leaves reflect light differently. The color change that arrives with the wet season is not only about more leaves appearing. It is also about how leaves handle light once water is plentiful. Well-hydrated foliage is often fuller, smoother, and richer in chlorophyll, which means it absorbs and reflects light differently from dry, dusty vegetation. When leaves are healthy and packed with water, green wavelengths can seem more vivid, while the dulling effect of dust and stress is reduced. That is why the landscape after sustained rain often looks not merely greener, but deeper, denser, and more alive. The shift can feel almost theatrical. Hills that seemed flat and faded take on contrast and depth. Forest canopies gleam. Grasses seem lit from within. It is a visual transformation rooted in plant physiology and surface optics, yet it feels emotional all the same. The wet season changes not just plant growth, but the very way the land returns light to our eyes. Cloud cover during wet months can soften shadows across entire landscapes. Sunlight on a dry season day can be hard-edged, fierce, and full of sharp contrasts. Then the wet months arrive, clouds spread across the sky, and the whole visual character of a place begins to soften. Thick cloud cover scatters incoming sunlight, turning what would have been direct beams into a broader, more diffuse glow. Shadows lose their knife-like edges. Valleys, fields, buildings, and trees seem wrapped in more even light. Colors can appear gentler, and distant features may blend into one another with a kind of atmospheric tenderness. This is one of the most beautiful changes the rainy season brings, because it reshapes a landscape without moving a single stone or tree. The world stays in place, but the light becomes different. Hillsides that looked harsh can seem calm. Human structures appear less severe. Even midday feels transformed. The wet season alters the mood of entire regions simply by changing how sunlight arrives. Thunder travels differently through humid air than through dry air. A thunderclap is the sound of air being violently heated and expanded by lightning, but the way that sound moves afterward depends on the atmosphere it travels through. Humid air has different physical properties from dry air, and those differences can influence the way thunder carries, softens, or rolls across a landscape. In wet season conditions, when the air is warm and moisture-rich, thunder may seem fuller, more layered, and more lingering than it does in crisp, dry weather. Temperature structure matters too. Sound can bend, reflect, or travel unevenly depending on the layers of air between the storm and the listener. That is why thunder sometimes arrives as a sharp crack, and other times as a long, spreading growl that seems to move through the sky like a wave. The rainy season gives thunder a stage of humid air and shifting temperature, and the atmosphere itself becomes part of the instrument that shapes what we hear. Rain on different surfaces creates surprisingly different acoustic worlds. One of the most intimate wonders of the wet season is how differently rain can sound depending on where it lands. On broad leaves, it taps and patters in soft, irregular rhythms. On corrugated metal, it can become a fierce drum roll. On deep puddles, it hisses and splashes. On dry dust, the first drops make almost no sound at all before the ground darkens and softens. Rain striking a forest canopy creates layers, with impacts high above followed by delayed dripping lower down. Rain on water adds another texture altogether, a delicate fizz of countless tiny collisions. The result is that a storm does not make one sound. It makes a whole shifting orchestra determined by roof, soil, bark, leaf, stone, and standing water. This is why the same shower can feel different from one place to another, even when the rainfall is identical. The wet season composes with surfaces, and every landscape becomes its own instrument. Seasonal humidity can change how wood, cloth, and paper behave. When the wet season settles in, the atmosphere begins to work on objects as steadily as it works on leaves and soil. Wood absorbs moisture from humid air and can swell, warp, or stick where it once moved freely. Doors scrape, floorboards shift, furniture joints tighten. Cloth behaves differently too, often feeling heavier, slower to dry, and more clingy against the skin. Paper curls, softens, and loses its crispness, which is why books, letters, and records have always needed special care in damp climates. What is so fascinating is that humidity does not have to arrive as visible water to transform a place. The air itself becomes active, quietly entering fibers and grains, changing texture, weight, and shape. The wet season is therefore not only something that falls from above, it is something that settles into materials and alters daily life from within, reshaping the very feel of the things people touch. Mold and decay accelerate when rainy seasons keep surfaces damp. Moisture is life-giving, but it is also the great invitation to decomposition. When the wet season keeps walls, bark, fabric, soil, and fallen wood persistently damp, fungi and bacteria find ideal conditions for breaking things down. Mold can spread across food, leather, paint, and stored belongings with astonishing speed. Leaves soften and collapse into the soil. Fallen branches begin to lose their firmness. Buildings that seemed sturdy in dry weather reveal new stains, odors, and weaknesses. This process can feel frustrating in human spaces, yet it is also one of nature's most important recycling systems. Decay returns nutrients to the ground, clears dead material, and keeps ecosystems from choking on their own remains. The wet season does not merely preserve life. It also hastens the dismantling of what has finished living. That tension is part of its power. Rain feeds growth at the same time that dampness quietly begins undoing the old world around it. Lightning often peaks during the build-up or heart of the rainy season. Before the wet season fully settles, or during its most energetic phase, the atmosphere can become primed for one of nature's most dramatic displays. Strong heating at the surface, deep moisture, and unstable air encourage towering storm clouds to grow rapidly upward. Inside those clouds, ice particles, water droplets, and violent air currents collide and separate charge until the electric imbalance becomes too great to contain. Then the sky releases it in a flash. This is why lightning often becomes especially frequent during the build-up or peak of the rainy months, when the atmosphere is both moist and turbulent enough to support intense convection. In some regions, evenings can pulse with distant strikes for hours, turning the horizon into a silent theater of branching light. What makes this so gripping is that lightning reveals the hidden electrical life of a storm. The wet season is not only water moving through air, it is also energy gathering until the sky breaks open. Some of the world's strongest storms form during rainy season transitions. The moments when one seasonal pattern gives way to another can be especially dangerous, because transitions often bring strong contrasts into the same atmosphere. Warm ocean surfaces may still be feeding moisture upward, while winds shift direction or vary sharply with height. Heat lingers over land. Pressure patterns reorganize. In that unsettled mix, some of the most powerful storms on Earth can take shape. The beginning and end of wet seasons are often times when tropical systems, severe thunderstorms, or sprawling rain-bearing disturbances find the ingredients they need to intensify. It is as though the climate is changing gears, and the friction of that change creates drama. These storms matter because they can arrive just when people are adjusting fields, roads, and expectations for the new season. The transition itself becomes part of the hazard. The rainy season is not always most violent at its center. Sometimes its edges are where the atmosphere shows its sharpest force. tropical cyclones can dump a season's worth of rain in days. A tropical cyclone is not only a wind machine, it is also a vast transport system for water. Drawing energy from wall-motion surfaces, it gathers enormous quantities of moisture and can carry them toward land in spiraling bands of rain that last for days. When such a storm slows down or interacts with mountains and coastlines, the results can be staggering. Places that might normally receive their wet season rainfall over many weeks can receive a huge fraction of that total in a very short time. Rivers surge, hillsides fail, and floodplains fill faster than the land can cope. What makes this so astonishing is the compression of time. The atmosphere takes what is usually a long seasonal delivery and pours much of it down almost at once. A cyclone can feel like the wet season intensified into a single event, proving how much water the tropical sky can hold when ocean heat and atmospheric structure align. Monsoon depressions can travel inland and drench huge regions. Not every great wet season storm arrives as a named cyclone. Monsoon depressions are lower pressure systems that form within the broader monsoon circulation and can move far inland, carrying deep moisture with them. As they travel, they draw in humid air and organize widespread cloud bands, often producing days of steady rain over enormous areas. Their power lies less in dramatic wind than in persistence and reach. A single depression can water multiple states or provinces, filling reservoirs, swelling rivers, and saturating farmland across regions far from the coast. Because they move over land rather than remaining offshore, they become one of the great engines of interior seasonal rainfall in some parts of the world. They are fascinating because they reveal how the wet season is built not only from local afternoon storms, but from large traveling systems that redistribute ocean-borne moisture deep into continents. A monsoon depression is like a mobile reservoir suspended in the sky. Urban flooding worsens when rain falls faster than streets can drain. A city can look solid and controlled until the wet season shows how quickly hard surfaces change the fate of water. Roads, pavements, rooftops, and parking areas do not absorb rainfall the way soil and vegetation do. Water runs across them at once, gathering speed as drains, gutters, and channels struggle to keep up. If rain falls faster than that system can move it away, streets become streams, underpasses become traps, and low-lying neighborhoods fill with water in threateningly short order. This is why a city can flood even without a major river overflowing nearby. The problem is not only how much rain falls, but how little time and space the ground gives it to sink in. The wet season exposes the consequences of paving over permeability. A storm that might have soaked harmlessly into open land becomes a fast-moving urban hazard. Water follows gravity with perfect honesty, and the city reveals every shortcut we denied it. Rainy seasons can expose weak infrastructure long before dry seasons do. A road, bridge, culvert, retaining wall, or drainage channel may seem perfectly adequate through months of dry weather. Then the wet season arrives and begins asking hard questions. Can this surface shed water without breaking apart? Can this embankment hold when the soil beneath it softens? Can this drain carry runoff at peak flow? Weak points that remained hidden in dry months often reveal themselves quickly under sustained rain. Cracks widen. Potholes multiply. Slopes slump. Foundations shift. What makes this so important is that rainfall does not merely damage infrastructure. It tests its assumptions. Designs that ignored seasonal water, poor maintenance, blocked drains, and undersized culverts all become visible when the sky turns serious. In that sense, the wet season acts like a stress examination for the built world. It finds the places where confidence was misplaced. Dry weather can flatter bad construction. Heavy rain almost never does. Bridges, roads, and railways must be designed for seasonal water extremes. Transport networks may seem like hard geometry laid across the land, but in wet season climates they are really negotiations with moving water. A bridge must survive not just the ordinary river beneath it, but the swollen, debris-laden flood that may come once or twice each year. A road must shed runoff, resist erosion, and keep its foundations stable when surrounding soils are soaked. Railways need drainage, protected embankments, and careful alignment, because saturated ground can shift, soften, or wash away beneath them. Designing for these conditions means thinking not in average weather, but in seasonal extremes. The structure has to endure the brief, violent moments that define the year more than the easy ones. This is what makes wet season engineering so fascinating. A bridge is not simply crossing a river. It is surviving the largest version of that river. Every culvert, slope, and support becomes a calculation about what water may do when the season is at full power. Farmers can lose crops either to too little rain or too much. The wet season is often spoken of as salvation for agriculture, but farmers know its generosity has limits in both directions. Too little rain can delay germination, stunt growth, and leave roots chasing moisture that never arrives. Too much can drown seedlings, rot roots, flatten grain, wash away fertilizer, and make fields impossible to work. That narrow middle ground is where the real challenge lies. Farmers are not simply hoping for rain. They're hoping for the right amount, at the right time, in the right sequence. A few missed weeks early in the season may be disastrous. A violent burst near harvest can be equally ruinous. This is what makes farming under seasonal rain so tense and fascinating. The same sky that promises abundance also holds the power to undo months of labor. Agriculture becomes a partnership with uncertainty, where success depends not only on soil and seed, but on whether the season remembers balance. Disease risk can shift during rainy seasons as insects and water change. When the wet season reshapes water and insect life, it can also reshape patterns of disease. Fresh standing water may create breeding sites for mosquitoes, increasing the risk of illnesses they carry. Flooding can mix waste into water sources or overwhelm sanitation systems. At the same time, cooler temperatures, cleaner flow in some areas, or the flushing of stagnant pools may reduce certain risks. This is why the health effects of the wet season are so complicated. Rain does not make one simple outcome. It rearranges the ecology of exposure. In some places, hospitals prepare for spikes in mosquito-borne disease. In others, diarrheal illnesses rise when water handling fails during floods. The relationship between rain and health is therefore deeply practical and deeply ecological. Seasonal water changes who breathes, what spreads, where contamination moves, and how people interact with their surroundings. The wet season enters the body as well as the landscape. Drinking water can improve or worsen depending on how rains are managed. Rain can be a blessing for drinking water, but only if it is caught, stored, and protected wisely. A strong wet season may refill reservoirs, recharge wells, and dilute some pollutants in rivers and lakes. Communities that depend on seasonal collection often welcome the first sustained rains as the return of security. Yet the same water can also create danger if runoff sweeps waste, sewage, sediment, or chemicals into supplies. Storage tanks may overflow. Open sources may become contaminated. Floodwater can blur the boundary between fresh water and everything people hope to keep away from it. That is why management matters so much. The wet season offers volume, but not automatically safety. Good drainage, protected storage, filtration, and planning determine whether rainfall becomes reliable drinking water or a transport system for contamination. What falls from the sky is only the beginning. The true outcome depends on what human systems do with that gift after it lands. Forecasting the rainy season remains difficult because many forces interact at once. For all our satellites, models, and climate records, the wet season still resists perfect prediction. That is because it is not controlled by one simple switch. Ocean temperatures matter. Land heating matters. Wind patterns at different heights matter. Mountains matter. Soil moisture from previous months can matter. So can large climate patterns such as El Niño, regional sea surface temperatures, and even the timing of storms already in progress. Each of these forces can strengthen, delay, bend, or disrupt the others. The result is a system full of interaction, where small shifts sometimes produce outsized consequences. Forecasters have improved greatly, and in many places, seasonal outlooks are genuinely useful. Yet uncertainty remains because the rainy season is a planetary conversation, not a single local event. That is part of what keeps it so compelling. We can watch it approach, measure its ingredients, and still find ourselves humbled by how many voices the atmosphere contains. Satellites now track rainy seasons by watching clouds, soil, and plants. For most of history, the wet season had to be judged from the ground by eye, memory, and hope. Now we can watch it unfold from orbit. Satellites track cloud fields spreading across oceans and continents, measure how wet the soil becomes after storms, and detect how quickly plants green up in response. Some instruments sense visible light. Others read heat, microwave signals, or subtle differences in reflected energy. Together they reveal not just where rain is falling, but what that rain is doing. A storm may pass, yet its signature remains in darker soil, swelling rivers, cooler land, and fresh vegetation. This means scientists can follow the wet season as a living process, rather than a single weather event. They can see it arriving, strengthening, stalling, and retreating over huge distances. What once felt local and mysterious can now be read across the whole planet, as if Earth were writing its seasonal pulse in patterns visible from space. Radar can reveal the inner structure of seasonal storm systems. A storm can look like a dark wall from the ground, but radar allows us to peer inside it. By sending out pulses of energy and measuring what bounces back from raindrops, hail, and ice, radar reveals where the heaviest rain sits, how storm bands curve, and how the whole system is organized in motion. It can show a compact cell building over hot ground, a long squall line pushing ahead of itself, or the rotating heart of a more dangerous storm. During the wet season, that matters enormously, because two clouds may look similar from a distance while behaving very differently inside. One may be brief and harmless. Another may hold intense downpours, fierce winds, or flooding risk. Radar turns the storm from a silhouette into a structure. It shows the hidden anatomy of rain, letting us watch the atmosphere build, organize, and release water with astonishing complexity. Scientists read ancient rainy seasons in lake mud and cave crystals. The wet seasons of the distant past did not vanish without leaving evidence. They wrote themselves into mud and stone. In lake beds, year after year of rainfall and runoff can leave thin layers of sediment, each carrying clues about how much water entered the basin, how strongly the surrounding land eroded, and what kinds of life flourished. Nearby, in caves, dripping water builds crystals called speleothems, including stalagmites, whose chemistry changes depending on rainfall above ground. By studying those layers and chemical signals, scientists can reconstruct patterns of wetter years, weaker monsoons, or long droughts stretching back thousands of years. It is a stunning idea. A vanished rainy season can still be read in the quiet accumulation of minerals and mud. Long after the clouds themselves are gone, their rhythm remains archived underground, waiting for someone to slice, measure, and translate the memory of water back into climate history. Tree rings can preserve clues about wet and dry years. A tree does not speak, yet it keeps a careful annual record of the conditions it lived through. In places where growth rises and falls with seasonal moisture, each year may produce a ring that is wider, narrower, denser, or lighter, depending on how favorable the rain was. A generous wet season can support stronger growth. A failed one may leave only a thin line of survival. By reading these rings, scientists can build long records of changing rainfall, sometimes reaching back centuries. Even better, many trees in the same region can be compared, letting researchers piece together a shared history of good years, lean years, and strange seasonal shifts. What makes this so beautiful is the intimacy of the archive. The evidence is not in grand monuments or written records, but inside living wood. A trunk becomes a timeline, and the wet seasons that shaped a forest remain visible as quiet bands beneath bark. Ice cores can hint at how distant rainy systems changed long ago. At first glance, ice from Greenland or Antarctica might seem far removed from monsoons, savannas, and tropical rainbelts. Yet ice cores hold chemical traces from the atmosphere, and those traces can sometimes reveal how distant rainy systems behaved in the past. Dust levels, isotopes, and trapped gases all reflect wider patterns of temperature, wind, and moisture transport across the planet. If a major rainy region weakened or shifted, that could alter the amount of dust lifted from dry lands, the circulation of air masses, or the broader climate balance recorded in the ice. This means frozen layers at the poles can help scientists understand seasonal rain far from the snow itself. It is one of the most astonishing features of Earth's climate system. Remote places are connected through air and water. The change in tropical rainfall may leave part of its story written into ancient ice at the ends of the Earth. Climate change is altering rainy seasons, though not everywhere in the same way. One of the hardest truths about the future of the wet season is that change will not arrive as one simple pattern. In some regions, the rains are becoming less reliable. In others, heavier bursts are occurring within seasons that may be shorter or more erratic. Some places may see delayed onset, altered retreat, or longer dry gaps between storms. This unevenness is what makes the shift so unsettling. Communities cannot rely on a single global rule. The wet season is being reshaped through warming oceans, changing land temperatures, altered air circulation, and local geography, all interacting in different combinations. For farmers, cities, and ecosystems, that means past experience remains useful, but no longer guarantees what comes next. The old rhythm may still be recognizable, yet its timing and intensity can drift. Climate change is not erasing rainy seasons everywhere. It is changing their character, and the changes do not arrive with equal force or in equal form. Warmer air can hold more moisture, raising the risk of heavier downpours. A warmer atmosphere has a larger capacity for water vapor, and that simple physical fact has huge consequences for the wet season. When air is hotter, it can gather and transport more moisture before condensation begins. Then, when the right conditions force that air to rise and cool, the sky has more water available to release. This does not guarantee non-stop rain, but it does raise the potential for more intense bursts when storms do fall. A downpour that might once have been strong can become exceptional. Drains fail faster. Streams rise more sharply. Hillsides saturate sooner. What makes this especially important is that the change can be felt in the character of rainfall, not just its total amount over a season. The wet months may still come, yet when they speak, they may do so in a louder voice. Warmer air does not merely carry heat. It loads the atmosphere with more possible water. Some places may get shorter rainy seasons, but more intense rain. A rainy season does not need to last as long to become more dangerous. In some places, climate projections and recent observations suggest the wet months may contract in duration while producing stronger bursts within that shorter window. That creates a strange and difficult pattern. There may be fewer rainy days overall, yet when storms do arrive, they release more water in less time. For landscapes and human systems, that is a hard bargain. Soil has less time to absorb moisture gradually. Reservoirs may fill unevenly. Flooding risk rises even while longer-term water security may worsen between storms. Agriculture can suffer because crops often need reliable timing more than dramatic totals. What makes this pattern so fascinating is its apparent contradiction. A place can become both more intense and less dependable at once. The wet season, instead of unfolding as a broad, sustained chapter, becomes compressed into sharper scenes, arriving harder, faster, and with less patience. Other regions may face longer dry spells between stronger wet bursts. In some climates, the future wet season may not simply grow wetter or drier overall. It may become more uneven. Storms may still arrive with force, yet the pauses between them may stretch longer than before. That creates a landscape of extremes within the same season. Soil dries, cracks, and heats between bursts, then receives sudden heavy rain that may run off quickly rather than soaking in fully. Rivers respond in jumps instead of steadier rises. Plants and farmers must cope with both waiting and excess. This rhythm can be especially hard on ecosystems adapted to more regular moisture, because living things often depend on spacing as much as total volume. What makes the pattern so striking is that the wet season begins to feel less like a continuous presence and more like a sequence of interruptions. Water comes in powerful episodes, but the silence between them grows longer. Abundance and scarcity start sharing the same chapter. Communities are adapting with new forecasts, storage systems, and flood planning. The wet season has always demanded adaptation, but modern communities are finding new ways to live with its shifting risks and rewards. Improved forecasts can help farmers choose planting dates, help cities prepare pumps and drainage crews, and help emergency services move before floods arrive. Water storage is changing too, with upgraded reservoirs, rooftop harvesting, groundwater recharge projects, and smarter release systems designed to save wet season abundance for leaner months. Flood planning has become more detailed, using maps, sensors, evacuation routes, and better awareness of which neighborhoods face the greatest danger. What is inspiring about this is that adaptation is not one grand invention. It is 1,000 practical responses tied to local experience. The wet season is still powerful, still surprising, but people are learning how to meet it with more information and better preparation. Water remains in command, yet communities are becoming more skillful at living with its seasonal return. Rainy seasons on islands can be shaped by surprisingly small changes in wind. On an island, a modest shift in wind direction can make an astonishing difference to the wet season. Because land areas are small and surrounded by open water, incoming moist air may strike one coast, rise over hills, and drop much of its rain before crossing to the other side. If the wings tilt only slightly, the zone of heaviest rainfall may move from one valley to another, or from windward slopes to a different coastline. This creates delicate local contrasts, where neighboring communities may experience very different wet seasons, despite sharing the same island. Mountains amplify the effect, but so does the simple geometry of sea and land. The atmosphere has little room for error. What makes this fascinating is how sensitive island climates can be. A tiny steering change in the wind can reshape cloud formation, stream flow, crops, and water supply. On islands, the wet season often depends on subtle guidance from the air. Volcanoes can influence rainy seasons by cooling sunlight and shifting circulation. A major volcanic eruption can interfere with the wet season even from far away. When a volcano sends sulfur-rich material high into the atmosphere, it can form reflective aerosols that reduce the amount of sunlight reaching Earth's surface. That surface cooling matters because rainy seasons depend strongly on contrasts in heating between land and ocean, and on the rising motion created by warm ground. If those contrasts weaken or shift, circulation patterns can change, sometimes altering monsoons and seasonal rain belts. The effect may not be the same everywhere, but history shows that large eruptions can disturb rainfall far beyond the volcano itself. This is one of the strangest reminders of how connected the climate system is. A mountain bursts open in one region, and months later, farmers elsewhere may experience a weaker wet season. Ash and aerosol in the high atmosphere become part of the story of rain, sunlight, and shifting wind on a global scale. Seasonal rain can clean the air by pulling particles from the sky. The wet season does not just water the ground. It also washes the atmosphere. As raindrops fall, they collide with dust, smoke particles, pollen, and other tiny materials suspended in the air. Some of those particles become trapped on the drops and are carried downward, clearing the sky in a process known as wet deposition. That is why the world, after a good rain, often feels sharper, fresher, and easier to breathe. Distant hills may suddenly appear more clearly. Leaves lose their coating of dust. Sunlight after the storm seems to arrive through cleaner air. This cleansing can matter for health as well as beauty, especially in places where dry months allow pollution and dust to build. What makes it so satisfying is the directness of it. The rain does not argue with the atmosphere. It simply passes through and brings part of it down. The wet season cleans not only streets and roofs, but the air itself. Wet months can reveal hidden archaeology when floodwaters reshape the ground. Heavy seasonal water can erase, damage, or bury things, but sometimes it also reveals them. Floodwaters may cut new channels, strip away topsoil, or expose layers of sediment that have hidden traces of past human life for centuries. After a strong wet season, pottery fragments, foundations, roads, irrigation works, or burial sites may suddenly appear where the ground has been opened. In floodplains and river valleys especially, archaeology often depends on this restless conversation between water and earth. The danger, of course, is that what is revealed may also be fragile and quickly lost again. Yet the moment itself is extraordinary. A season of rain can briefly pull back the skin of the landscape and show a human story buried underneath. What feels like destructive change in one sense becomes revelation in another. The wet season does not only shape living worlds, it can also uncover forgotten chapters of people who once lived by the same rains. Some caves fill, flood, and sing differently during the rainy season. A cave may seem like a place apart from weather, yet the wet season can transform it in dramatic ways. Rainwater seeps through cracks, feeds underground streams, and raises water levels in chambers and passages that may have been dry or quiet before. Pools deepen, flowstones darken, air currents shift. In some cave systems, the movement of water and air changes the soundscape so much that the cave seems to develop a different voice. Drips become rhythms. Underground rivers roar more loudly. Narrow passages whistle as air pressure changes. This is why people sometimes speak of caves singing during wet months. The music is not mystical in origin, but it can feel that way. What makes it so beautiful is that the rainy season reaches into hidden stone, altering darkness as surely as it alters forests and fields. Beneath the surface, the season is still moving, and even the underground world begins to resonate. Seasonal rains can connect isolated ponds into brief highways for life. During the dry months, many ponds and shallow wetlands exist as separate worlds. Fish, amphibians, aquatic insects, and tiny crustaceans may be trapped in isolated patches of water with no easy path between them. Then the rains come, low ground fills, channels overflow, and those separate pools link up into temporary watery corridors. For a brief time, creatures can move, mix, breed, and colonize new places. Eggs and larvae drift. Fish slip through flooded grass. Frogs spread outward into fresh habitat. The wet season turns isolation into connection. This matters far more than it first appears, because it allows genes, nutrients, and species to travel across a landscape that is closed for much of the year. The connections may last only days or weeks, yet they shape the entire ecological map. Water becomes a road network that appears, does its work, and then disappears again when the land dries and the ponds fall silent. Even giant animals can depend on tiny rainy season insects. Size can be misleading in the wet season. Even the largest animals may depend on swarms of creatures so small they are easy to dismiss. Insects pollinate plants, decompose waste, feed fish and birds, and form an enormous share of the protein moving through seasonal ecosystems. If the wet months trigger a boom in insect life, the effects ripple upward. Birds breed successfully. Amphibians thrive. Fish grow quickly. Plants set seed. Herbivores then benefit from richer vegetation, and predators benefit from healthier prey. In this way, giant animals such as elephants, buffalo, or large antelope can depend indirectly on tiny wet season insects without ever seeming to notice them. The scale contrast is part of the wonder. A towering mammal may owe part of its good year to a cloud of flies, beetles, termites, or pollinators that flourished after rain. The small world beneath the eye helps support the large world above it. A failed rainy season can echo through food webs for years. When the wet season fails, the damage is not always confined to that one year. Plants may produce fewer seeds, less fruit, and weaker growth. Herbivores may breed less successfully or lose young. Predators then face reduced prey. Streams may carry less nutrient flow. Trees stressed by drought may become more vulnerable to disease or fire in later seasons. The result is that one bad year can keep speaking long after the cloud should have returned. Food webs remember. Some species recover quickly, others do not. A failed wet season can therefore become a delayed ecological event, with consequences unfolding over several breeding cycles or migration periods. What makes this so sobering is how invisible the future effects can be at first. Once the dry season ends, it may seem as though the worst is over. Yet the missing water has already written itself into bodies, seeds, births, and deaths that will shape the landscape for years. The end of a rainy season can be as dramatic as its arrival. People often focus on the first storm, the first green shoots, the first relief from heat. Yet the departure of the wet season can be just as powerful. Rivers begin falling back within their banks. Temporary wetlands shrink. Roadways reappear. The sky opens into longer spans of blue. Insects change. Frogs fall silent. Grasses begin the slow shift from lushness toward drying fiber. For farmers and animals alike, this transition matters deeply because it marks the closing of a window. Water must now be stored, used, or chased. Seeds must already be set. Young must be strong enough to survive the leaner months ahead. The ending is not merely an absence of rain. It is a reordering of life, every bit as consequential as the onset. What makes it dramatic is that abundance begins withdrawing in plain sight. The wet season leaves the stage, and the whole landscape must adjust to living on memory. Rainy seasons show how water, wind, life, and time are inseparable. By the time you have followed a wet season from distant ocean warming to cloud formation, from seed germination to migration, from floodplain mud to human calendars, it becomes clear that this is not just a story about rain. It is a story about connection. Water depends on wind to move. Life depends on water to act. Time depends on recurring seasons to give rhythm to both. The wet months reveal those links in a way few other natural processes can. A change in sea temperature alters winds. Winds steer clouds. Clouds reshape rivers, soils, insects, forests, cities, and memory. Generations of people build homes, songs, storage, and hope around that return. What makes the rainy season so deeply fascinating is that it refuses to stay in one category. It is weather, ecology, history, engineering, sound, scent, and emotion at once. To watch it closely is to see the world behaving as a single connected system. As our journey through rainy seasons comes to a close, you might notice how much larger this world feels now. What first seemed like simple weather became something far grander. We followed winds reversing across oceans, clouds rising over mountains, forests helping make their own rain, and rivers swelling until they redrew the land. We watched deserts bloom, floodplains awaken, frogs call into the dark, and herds move beneath distant storms. We stepped into cities shaped by monsoons, fields timed to water, and old human lives built around the waiting, arrival, and fading of the rains. And perhaps that is the lasting wonder of it. A rainy season is never only rain. It is scent rising from soil. It is leaves deepening into green. It is thunder rolling through heavy air. It is the sound of water finding every hollow, every root, every riverbed, every waiting seed. It is the sky touching the earth, and the earth answering back with life. Now the storms can drift farther away. The rivers can settle. The night can grow softer around you. If you enjoyed this slow journey through the science and wonder of rainy seasons, you might like to subscribe, leave a thought below, or share this video with someone else who loves drifting off with the natural world. And if you happen to still be awake in a moment, there will be another video waiting for you on the screen, ready to carry you into the next story. But for now, there is nowhere to go, and nothing more to hold on to. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the last of the day wash quietly away, like rain fading into the distance. Sleep well, and good night.